So if you're here now, and then you know that you're here for food safety on your farm panel, we're so excited to have these speakers with us today. I'm delighted to introduce our first panel speaker, Mark Reed. He is the Produce Safety Program Manager for the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, and he's got great information to share with you about the program there and some resources for you to consider. So Mark, it's all yours.
Okay, let's see if I can get this screen share going again. You guys see my screen okay?
Looks good. If you go to present, yep, there you go, perfect.
Cool, okay, great. Thanks for the introduction there, Brooke. And thanks to Brooke and Jenny and all of our friends at Oak for inviting us here to give a short presentation. So I don't have a whole lot of time, but we are on the food safety panel, and we at the Kentucky Department of Agriculture Produce Safety Program are the lead regulatory agency for produce food safety, particularly on-farm produce safety in Kentucky. So I want to give you just a really quick overview of some of the rules and regulations out there that you should be aware of. As many of you know, food safety and in particular produce safety has gotten a lot of bad PR and a lot of bad press lately. I know Amber is out in California. Some of that produce maybe originates out in the California area and has been responsible for some of the recalls. But though we hear about some of the bigger recalls like the Dole and some of those other big brand names, some of the same events that can occur in really large farms that we've heard of can also occur on the smallest of farms. But anyway, just some examples of some events relative to produce safety and why we should care about produce safety, because I want you to think for just a minute, if you are a grower, regardless of the size of your farm, what's the worst thing that could probably happen to you as a grower? And then also think about what's the worst thing that might happen to you that could also result in negative consequences for your other farmer friends and growers across the state. While you're thinking on that, in the interest of time, I'm going to help you out. This is the worst that could happen. I've been in public health for, I don't know, 25, almost 30 years now, and we've investigated a lot of foodborne illnesses and outbreaks. To my knowledge, there has never been a foodborne outbreak in Kentucky that has been traced back to Kentucky grown produce. That's good news. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but at least it wasn't a big outbreak. However, in 2012, this was a really close shave. How many of you actually remember this? This was a salmonella outbreak, 2 strains of salmonella actually at a farm we didn't know for the longest time what the origin of this was. And if you see, there were more people in Kentucky that got sick from this outbreak than any other state. So for the longest time, we were thinking, where did this originate from? Did it come from Kentucky? Did it come from Indiana? Where did it come from? So it was a close shave, but we actually found out in our investigations with FDA that was actually a farm in southern Indiana. So obviously, once the press got a hold of that, obviously the farm didn't get real good publicity. This happened in the summer months as well, and this was cantaloupe. So not only while we were trying to determine where the location or the source of this outbreak was, we first determined that it was likely associated with cantaloupe. So what do you think that did to all of the cantaloupe growers across Kentucky and across several states? For the longest time, people were afraid to eat cantaloupes. So this is just an example of one of the worst things that could happen. Again, a foodborne outbreak that's tied to something that may have happened on your farm. In this case, there were 3 deaths, over 250 illnesses. All 3 of those deaths were actually Kentucky residents. So with that, this happened in 2012. A real quick background on FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and the Produce Safety Rule. That actually happened a year after FSMA was signed into a law in 2011, but it also happened before the Produce Safety Rule was actually written and implemented. So that outbreak kind of happened in that never land where we didn't really have a produce safety program in Kentucky or in many other states for that matter. But the KDA program began in 2018. Some of you were here last year and may have saw my presentation as well. But the real part of our program actually started, I would say, 2 years ago, actually in 2020, with the passage of our state produce safety statute and regulation. And basically that statute and regulation that we have pretty much adopts the federal produce safety rule by reference. The good thing on that is that if you are a Kentucky grower that might possibly be subject to these rules or subject to inspections, you're not going to have to deal with FDA on your farm. You will be dealing with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, my produce safety team, and we're all Kentuckians. We're actually all, located in the Office of Agricultural Marketing at KDA. So though we are a regulatory agency, our number one mission is to help get the word out about the new rules, help get those folks that need to be in compliance, and we're there to help you. So we want you to think of us as not your enemy, but as your team member in produce safety. Just a little bit of summary of the state rules. This is actually, again, based on the federal rules, but there's some guidelines for worker health and hygiene, soil amendments. You don't use improperly composted animal manure. There's some steps to take to keep wild animals as much as possible out of the growing fields. One of the big ones is agricultural water. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but we have heard from FDA that a lot of those testing requirements for the production water are apt to change. So they may change and be a little less onerous. I'm not sure if Amber is going to go over that at all, but rather than doing a lot of those water tests for production water, you might actually have to be doing more of a risk assessment kind of thing on your farm. And then there's some requirements for post-harvest handling and sanitation on the farm. So what's covered under the produce safety rule? I'm not going to go over all this, but FDA has a really long list. But basically, covered produce is that produce that we typically would eat raw. Think a salad bar. What are all of those produce items that maybe make up your favorite salad? Mushrooms, lettuce, onion, tomato. Those are the common ones that come to mind for me. What's not typically in that salad that you would eat at the salad bar raw? I don't think I've ever seen raw potatoes in a salad bar. I'm not for sure, but that's one example I can think of. So again, covered produce is the key word, and that's produce that we commonly consume raw. And that's the reason that it's so risky, is it's grown outside in the environment. It's not grown in a sterile environment. So it's your job. Food safety begins on the farm is one of the mantras that we speak. So it's your job as a grower to keep contamination off of that produce. And that's the impetus of the produce safety rule is prevention. So our state regulation is pretty much, again, adopts the federal regulation or federal rule by adopts it by reference. There are a couple of Kentucky specific changes in here that we'll go over in a little bit. But first of all, I want you to know there's no permit requirement. You don't have to pay a fee to be inspected. There is no permit requirement like some of the other food safety things are in Kentucky, like restaurants and grocery stores in that matter. We do have inspection frequencies. I'm not going to go into that, but for every farm that's covered that needs to be inspected, once we complete an inspection and you've basically passed an inspection, and we expect pretty much everyone to pass their first inspection, but we will issue what we call a certificate of compliance. And if needed, you can show that to your vendors or anybody that you work with or sell to that, hey, look, I have been inspected by KDA and I am in good standing. So that's more kind of a marketing tool that we would use. Also, and this is important, not everybody on this Zoom meeting is going to be inspected. There's a lot of exemptions in the federal produce safety rule and in the Kentucky rule. One of the main ones of those is for small farmers. So if you are currently a fruit and vegetable grower in Kentucky and your total produce sales is less than $25,000 a year, you're probably going to be exempt. And so we've came to see that a lot of our farmers market vendors are going to be in that exempt category. So that means you may not ever have to be inspected, but there are some Kentucky specific requirements, again, even if you're exempt from inspection, that I'll go over with you in just a few in this presentation. So this is just, again, a copy of our certificate of compliance. Every time we do an inspection of a farm that's covered, this will be issued if you pass the inspection. So it's something you can kind of hang up for the public to see, or if you've got people that you supply to that require some kind of proof that you're in good standing with the state regulatory agency, that's what this is intended for. So one of our first mantras, or another mantra that we use, again, as I noted, we're in the Office of Agricultural Marketing. We don't want to shut down any family farms. We want you to succeed. You might have to be inspected, or you might have to follow some parts of these rules, but our number one mission is to educate before we regulate. And this is, I think, at maybe the Kentucky Extension Conference. We partner with the University of Kentucky in producing a lot of educational materials, brochures, and actually doing a lot of training. So our outreach to growers and stakeholders is one of our top priorities, and just getting the word out. And while we're on that subject, anybody on this call, if you're a member of a co-op or a farmer's market, or any other type of association similar to Oak, larger or even smaller in Kentucky, and you would like for us to come speak to you, we'd be glad to do that, to make sure that your participants and folks actually understand the rules and the regulations. If you would visit our exhibitor tab on the Whova app, certainly invite you to do that. And these are two publications that we recently just came out with that give more of an overview of the Kentucky rules than I've got time to do right now. But the University of Kentucky did an extension publication that's out that explains kind of in depth the Kentucky program. And then at a higher level, we've just produced a produce safety brochure that also goes over the Kentucky, the KDA produce safety program. So I'd certainly invite you to stop by our virtual exhibit booth and download these documents. So here's probably one of the most important slides of my presentation. And this is something that's different in the Kentucky rule that's not in the federal rule. So regardless of your farm size or sales volume, the Kentucky rules actually require all produce growers in Kentucky, again, regardless of size or sales volume, to complete what we call the Produce Farm Inventory Survey. It'll take you less than probably 3 minutes to complete. It's not a big, long 3-hour survey, but we just basically are trying to collect basic information about your farm and your operation. A lot of these, actually more than half of these that we're receiving back, we're finding that your farm's exempt because, again, you have less than that $25,000 in produce sales threshold. But whether or not you think you're exempt, this is something that is a requirement to be filled out and completed. Right now, we know there are a number of farms across Kentucky that should be completing this form that probably haven't. So we again want to encourage you to complete this, and want you to know that this is one of the Kentucky requirements. We are not going to sell your farm information to any advertisers. We're not even going to turn your farm information over to FDA. We use it internally, and that's what helps us help you determine whether or not you're actually covered by the rules, and most importantly, whether or not you actually are subject to an inspection. So that's what this is, and there are links to it on our Kentucky Produce Safety page as well. There's 2 ways to complete the form. Obviously, we're not in person, but on the left, you can actually see the questions that are on our hard copy survey form that we would hand out if we were in person. So you can see there's really only 8 fields that we want you to complete. And then over on the right-hand side, again, if you go to the KDA Produce Safety webpage, you can complete this and submit it electronically as well. So again, for everybody that's on this call, if you're a produce grower, fruit and vegetable grower, and you have not already completed the survey, please do so. Another additional requirement in Kentucky's rules that's a little bit different from the federal rules is that we require growers that have over 25,000 in produce sales, average yearly sales based on, I guess, the last 3 years, to actually attend what we call the PSA Produce Safety Alliance Grower Training Course. And that is a free course. It's probably about a $500 value, but it's a free course to Kentucky residents. Excuse me. And it basically is a really souped up version of what we used to call the produce best practices training. So rather than an hour, this course is probably about 6 or 7 hours long. But there are different instructors that complete the course. You get a really nice certificate from the Association of Food and Drug Officials when you've completed the course. And even if you're a farm that is small enough that you're exempt and you might never, ever be inspected by KDA, you're still allowed to take this course because, again, regardless of your farm size, produce safety begins on the farm. So whether or not you would be inspected, you can still take the course. Our rules simply state that if you have over 25,000 in average yearly sales, then you have to take it. Anybody else, you're wide open and more than welcome to attend. So again, one of the first steps to compliance, and this is kind of the take-home message of my presentation as I wrap up, the first step towards compliance, again, is to complete that produce farm inventory survey. And this is just a photo. I've waited about 2 years, almost 3 years to get this photo, but this was taken earlier this month at the Fruit and Vegetable Conference. And we actually were able to snag our commissioner, Dr. Ryan Quarles, for a quick photo op at our outreach table. And again, I think we're going to have a similar table with information and some folks handy to answer any questions you have at the 2 live Oak events as well that Brooke mentioned earlier. So we look forward to meeting you folks there. With that, I am going to end my presentation. I'll do the stop sharing. I'll leave this up just for a few seconds if you want to write down my phone number or email. And then I'll turn it over to Brooke to further orchestrate the rest of the panel, and I'll hang out for questions at the end. So thanks again, everybody, for inviting me. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Thanks so much, Mark. Great info as always. I did get the chance to drop a couple links in the chat there. So I dropped a link to the survey and a link to the produce safety page on KDA's site. So people could look up those in-person and virtual PSA grower training courses that are upcoming. I really botched the text on that survey, so don't read the whole paragraph of stuff. I copied and pasted wrong, but the link is there for the survey. That's the important part. We did have one quick question. We are going to save questions at the end, but because I'm talking about it, how often do you want folks to fill out that farm inventory survey? Just the one time?
Yeah, so right now, if you just complete it one time, that's all we need. Eventually, once we think we've gotten pretty much most of our inventory accounted for and the farms and growers accounted for, we may reach out to you to update that. And certainly if you complete the survey this year and you find that you're less than 25,000 in sales and you're not going to be inspected, that's fine. But eventually, I think the goal is for most of our small farmers is to actually grow those sales numbers. So you might be exempt this year, but 3 years down the road, if you find that you exceed that 25,000 in sales, certainly reach out to us and we can review and if necessary, update your inventory.
Sounds great. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Up next, so excited to introduce Bryan Brady. Bryan is, we know through the Cultivate Kentucky Partnership, he works directly with specialty crop producers and local food aggregators through food hubs and produce auctions. He provides technical assistance and education on food safety, so specifically GAP and FSMA, and really looks at quality management and general wholesale readiness in these operations. Bryan helps farmers find cost-effective solutions to entering the local wholesale marketplace and connects them with resources to support them on that journey. So questions abound in this produce food safety journey. And I'm going to tell you, Bryan has a lot of answers that can provide farmers with critical support in thinking about how they need to adjust their facilities, their operation, their practices. We refer folks to Bryan all the time. He's worked with a ton of farmers in the network, so he's probably familiar to most of you, but Bryan, take it away.
Thank you, Brooke. Let me go ahead and share screen here. So GAP audits, third-party audits, like Brooke said, that's a big part of what I do with Cultivate Kentucky. You know, one thing that we want to kind of make note of going right after Mark, and he's talking about FSMA and the produce safety rule, is the gap audit is voluntary. Okay, this is not something that's required of you. Generally, the way that it works when you want to sell wholesale, most buyers or food hubs that deal with other buyers are going to require that you have a third-party food safety audit or a gap audit. And so you voluntarily go through that audit process. Just some quick introductory things about the gap audit. It's an annual certification. With the first year definitely being the big lift. The first year, we'll talk about this, briefly, but the first year is when you have to write your food safety plan. You have to implement everything that you say you're going to do in the food safety plan, and you have to start keeping records. And it takes a little while to figure out how to do that efficiently. Now, one thing that I've noticed in my 5 years here is that organic growers are definitely more adept at this because they're used to doing the same thing. They're used to having plans, standard operating procedures, log sheets, things of that nature. Any of the log sheets that overlap between a gap audit and an organic audit, you're allowed to use interchangeably. So there are different types of gap audits where with organic, there's the National Organic Program. With gap audit, there are different types, and it's important to know from your buyer who exactly or what gap audits you actually need. The more intense the audit, generally the more expensive. So we definitely don't want to have, one of the main things that I try to do is make everything cost effective. So we want to get the correct audit for you. Now, there are lots of available resources for a gap audit. Food safety plan is a big document, but there are great templates. Lots of universities have different styles of templates, different templates for different types of audits. So part of my job is to work with you to figure out which one we need and which one we're going to use. Lots of standard operating procedure examples, policy examples, record keeping templates, things like that. So you're not starting from scratch. And then in some cases, in some states, there is on-farm technical assistance. And luckily in Kentucky, we have that. And that's me. That's my job. I am that person. So real quick overview of some of the types of gap audits. This is constantly changing. The most common one that is used now, when I first started, this was not the case, but now the produce, the GAP's harmonized standard was developed by United Fresh, the Produce Association, basically to harmonize all the different audits into one harmonized standard, so that whether or not you have the USDA performing the audit or you have a private company performing the audit, the standards are going to be the same. We quite often in Kentucky, because we don't have a USDA auditor in state, use private audit companies. It tends to be cheaper, and they tend to be more nimble. They can schedule audits much quicker usually, and it's generally more cost effective and cheaper than the USDA audits. That being said, your buyer might require that you have a USDA inspector for your audit. They offer the GAP audit, which is it's older. It's what we were getting when I first started, but now everything's kind of pivoted to harmonized GAP and harmonized GAP Plus. GAP Plus aligns with the FSMA PSR. And then there's group GAP, which is a situation where if you work with, and this is generally used by plain community Amish Mennonite farmers, because you have a community of 30 farms that all live together, and you're able to have the entire group of farmers done. But it can be used by any group of farmers. Sometimes food hubs like to use group GAP for their the farms that work with them. And then there's also some individual crop options. This is more of a thing that's kind of done in California, much bigger production areas where you're growing 300, you're only growing tomatoes and you're growing 3,000 acres of tomatoes, and you just get a tomato GAP audit. And then some of the more intense ones are Primus GFS audit, Canada GAP audit, things like that. And we've worked with all of those since I've been here. So the cost of gap audits is a big concern for people, and rightfully so. There's not a lot of money to throw around for an annual certification, when you're a small to medium-sized farmer. So I think one of the things that we've done since, starting the Cultivate Kentucky program is kind of dispel the myth of the cost of the actual audit. Sure, we may run into situations where, that some of the changes you have to make to get gap audited might be expensive, but I try to, generally make sure that, you're not spending more money on things than you should. But okay, let's break down the costs. So based on farms that applied for the Kentucky Horticultural Council audit cost share, which is available again this year, 2022. If you go to the Kentucky Horticulture Council website, you can find the cost share application there. It's free to apply. You just have to have your Kentucky Proud number. There's no penalty if you don't end up getting an audit that year and you get approved for the funds. And it's also not a competitive cost share. It is kind of a first come, first serve thing because there's a limited amount of money. But that being said, the average cost of the audit from farms that worked with me to get gap audited was $607 between 2018 and 2020 was $675. And then the audit cost share, which covers 75% of the cost of the audit up to $1,250, pulls that down to about $169 out of pocket average cost of the gap audit. So you can see, there's a lot of numbers that get thrown around. The ones I generally hear from farms are, is this going to cost me about $1,500, $2,000? That's not the case in most cases, unless you're going through with a USDA gap plus harmonized audit, because you're dealing with a very big wholesale buyer. Then it's generally going to cost you, from the $100 to $200 range with the audit cost share. Some of the things that I do to try to help mitigate those costs is work with farmers to schedule an audit on the same day as neighboring farms or farms in the area to try to split the travel costs and kind of get tacked on to the flat fee for the cost of the audit. We try very hard to prepare your food safety plan in the order of the auditor's checklist so that it's much easier for them and quicker for them to go through your food safety plan. And we try to have your records organized and readily available so that part of the process of the audit is quick and efficient. And the auditor appreciates that as well. So all that being said, the Cultivate Kentucky program, what I do and focus on, I'm an extension associate at the University of Kentucky. I'm housed at the Food Connection. Again, my main focus here is, about 50% of what I do is produce food safety in this gap third-party audit sphere. I help with that food safety plan development. Yes, I give you templates, but I also help you write your drafts. I proofread things for you, and I help kind of push you along, find the right records, help you tune them to your operation, given that everybody's operation is unique. I help try to find efficient ways for you to implement those food safety plans and procedures. And then, again, I help with third-party audit scheduling and also direction to available resources, particularly being in the, extension field. I can direct you to all kinds of appropriate technical resources and technical assistance that's appropriate for you. And then the Cultivate Kentucky Partnership with multiple farm to table coordinators. We work with the Kentucky Court Council. We work with KCARD. We work with lots of other organizations. And those partners, we can leverage those partners' connections to help find the best wholesale buyers for you. And then, another thing that we've been focusing on over the last couple of years, and there's a new grant through the Hort Council that's going to really place some nice focus on produce quality, things that you can do pre-harvest, during harvest, post-harvest, to basically increase your shelf life extension. It's something that everybody should be interested in, even if you're not selling wholesale. How do I take care of this produce? It's amazing coming out of the field. How do I keep it that way? And until it gets, to the end user, and the end user can keep it in the, and continue to use it for longer than maybe they could before. And so the results of the last 5 years, I started in August 2016. When I first came on, if you went to the USDA website, or you talked generally to other extension agents and produce buyers, there were about 7 farms audited in Kentucky at the time they were gap audited. And this was a real bottleneck for wholesale production in Kentucky. Currently, an additional 41 farms and 4 facilities, 2 of which are food hubs, 2 of which are produce auctions, work directly with the Cultivate Kentucky program to become GAP certified. There is a 100% success rate of passing the audit the first time with our program. And that has a lot to do with the fact that I'm not going to let you go through the audit if you're not ready. Or I'm at least going to be straight with you about it and say, it's time to reschedule. We generally like to just stay on schedule and get everybody ready and have their audit when they're planning to have their audit. But if you're not ready, I'll let you know. And we won't waste that money on the auditor. We'll spend a little bit more time getting ready, and then we'll make sure that you pass. We've assisted with an estimated number of around 100 food safety plans that have been developed, and that's something that we generally try to do with folks that are interested in GAP, is at least help them get to that food safety plan level where they have a good food safety plan draft, so that if they do have to get a GAP audit at kind of a last minute notice when they have crops in the ground, they're at least ready to go. And then we've had over 200 farm visits in those 5 years. Things got slowed down a little bit with the pandemic, but really hopeful that this growing season, things will pick back up again. With that being said, this is my contact info. I would say right now, the best way to get in touch with me would definitely be email. You can certainly call or text me. Right now we've got all these quarantines happening and I've got little kids. And so answering the phone in the middle of the day can be difficult. But again, my email, I'll always return an email to you within 24 hours. That's my goal. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Bryan. Great info. I feel like I have to do a shameless plug here for our produce safety and post-harvest handling produce quality field day coming up in partnership with you on May 5th. And we'll be at the UK Organic Farming Unit in Lexington. Anyone who's interested to learn more from Bryan and see what it means for the farm operation, join us then. Save the date though, because registration is not open yet. All right, thanks so much, Bryan. I'm going to introduce our last panelist here, and then we'll definitely have time for questions. So drop those questions into the chat if you have them. It's an honor to have Amber here with us today. Amber Sciglio is the manager of the science programs for the Organic Center. She works closely with researchers, industry, farmers, and policymakers to identify organic research needs. She facilitates project implementation and communicates scientific results across the organic sector. And she does it beautifully, for folks like us who are in the nonprofit sector and for researchers, but also just for consumers who are interested. It's a real skill set. She leads the center's reports that compile current science on critical issues affecting organic food and farming, and heads the center's grant writing program. So she's also an Oak board member and a great collaborator. So Amber, so glad you're here with us today. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to try to do this share screen business. Okay, and start my slideshow for you. Let's see. Can you see the slide?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Thanks. Okay, I need to move your faces somehow. Let's see. Okay, there you can do it. Great. Well, thank you. I'm actually really excited to see how many people we have attending this session. When we were discussing this panel, we weren't really sure who all would hang in this late in the game, but I'm super excited to see so many people. So thanks for being here with us today. As Brooke mentioned, my name is Amber Siligo, and I am the Associate Director of Science Programs at the Organic Center. And today, I might be a little bit less of a resource of information to you, but more of a bridge of getting your experiences to policymakers. So I'm going to be talking about a recently funded needs assessment project that we have that will be addressing incongruities between food safety management strategies and the National Organic Program standards. This project was funded by the USDA NIFA program OREI, which stands for Organic Agricultural Research and Extension Initiative. And the project is actually led by Dr. Patrick Bauer out of the University of Rhode Island, and we are working in partnership with him at the Organic Center. So I want to give you a little bit of background about the center and this project, just in case you're not familiar with us. But so we are basically a nonprofit organization with a mission to help fill organic research gaps and also to communicate research results to the public, like I had mentioned. Our work informs a wide range of audiences, including consumers, about the benefits of organic. We help provide some technical resources to farmers and guide policymakers as well as other industry stakeholders. And through our constant communication and information gathering we have from all organic stakeholders along the supply chain, we discovered that there was a need for more work to help figure out, first identify and then figure out how to work past or work through tensions that exist between some food safety regulations and some National Organic Program standards. So we partnered up with Patrick Bauer, and we partnered with Patrick because he was working at UC Berkeley in the Central Coast region of California, where they're having a lot of food safety issues, which I'll bring up a little bit later. And he has a lot of expertise in environmental policy and food management. So we asked him to lead a grant proposal that would help get funding for a needs assessment, which we won. And now we're trying to figure out how to help organic farmers better meet the needs of NOP standards and these third-party safety requirements that we've been hearing about today. So my goal today is to share with you just a bit of information about this project and the challenges that we've been hearing from farmers all across the United States. And also my main goal is to hear some stories from you so that we can make sure that we include Kentucky farmer voices as we continue to develop a larger research project that will help find solutions to the challenges that we identify in this needs assessment. So I'll start with some project background before I launch into some poll questions that will give you an opportunity to share with me. As we've been talking about, we know that food safety is a major and growing concern for the entire specialty crop industry. And we have found that organic growers expend a significant amount of money and resources to comply with food safety requirements that can stem both from FSMA, as we were talking about earlier, and private third-party certification programs. And the NASS 2019 organic survey showed that organic farmers on average spent over $10,000 on food safety related expenses compared to $2,800 on average for organic certification. And the high price tag on food safety can be higher for small farms despite or regardless of organic certification. There are national surveys and economic models that have shown that small scale farms pay disproportionately more for food safety costs compared to their larger scale counterparts, so sometimes up to 7 times more between the smallest and the largest farms surveyed. And for organic farmers, they can face even higher compliance costs compared to conventional growers. This kind of getting a little bit dated, I guess, now that we're all the way in 2022, but a 2015 study showed that sustainable growers, which encompasses organic growers, pay an estimated 13 to 60% more on practices, including soil amendments, field inspection, or sampling and testing compared to their conventional counterparts. And organic growers can also have unique food safety compliance challenges. So, many of the ecologically based management practices that are used by organic farmers can sometimes raise red flags for food safety inspectors and buyers of fruits and vegetables. For example, habitat maintained to conserve biodiversity that's put nearby farms can be perceived to harbor wildlife that can intrude a farm and spread pathogens. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but I will say that so far the science does not fully back up the extremity of the fear that exists in some parts of the country. And we actually have seen multiple studies that have come out that show the opposite. And similarly, some buyers and inspectors can view the use of biological soil amendments of animal origin, like manure-based compost, as a pathogen pathway into the soil or on the crops themselves. And to address this concern of risk, the National Organic Program requires certified producers to follow a 90 or 120-day interval standard between the application of untreated biological soil amendments of animal origin. It's kind of a mouthful to say, and the crop harvest. And that just depends, the 90 or 120-day interval depends on whether or not the edible portions of the crops are in indirect or direct contact with the soil. And this can be sort of challenging and problematic, particularly for those who are growing crops that have short growing periods and might need to be harvested before that 120-day interval would be completed. And we are currently working on another OREI full proposal, multi-region. So we're working with researchers across the United States who are studying the effectiveness of this time interval with hopes that the results will help inform that policy. And another challenge that we've heard from organic farmers is about the prohibition against many synthetic sanitizing solutions, which reduces the tools that are available, as well as the capacity for an organic operation to fight pathogens in water or on food handling surfaces like tools and equipment. We see that there is a need for food safety requirements to change pace as more science is conducted, particularly in organic systems. My experience is in the my research experience is in the Central Coast region of California. And in that region, it has long been recognized that regulatory reforms that are aimed at preventing human pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella from contaminating fruits and vegetables can unintentionally interfere with efforts to farm sustainably, especially when the reforms outpace the state of the science. So for instance, in this intensive row vegetable growing region, in response to some early foodborne illness outbreaks, there were some food safety reforms that were created in absence of scientific evidence, and they pressured farmers to really suppress wildlife and remove vegetative habitat near their fields. And this resulted in a loss of 13% of riparian vegetation. But also one thing that was really sad is that there was this fantastic program that was getting hedgerows installed on all kinds of farms. And in response to these food safety pressures, a lot of those hedgerows were removed and continue to be removed. And there are recent studies that are showing that this pressure continues in the region. And it does pose a barrier to using, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. It does pose a barrier to the use also of biological soil amendments of animal origin. I should just say BSAAOs because that's how it's written usually. But yeah, and in fact, in this region, very few farmers will use any kind of fertilizer that comes from an animal source. Although strawberry farmers will use fish emulsion in their fertigation of organic strawberries, but usually people are avoiding compost and animal-based fertilizers a lot. So for organic growers, these pressures can run sort of counter to organic requirements to maintain biodiversity and also to support and enhance biodiversity, and they can interfere with organic soil fertility management. So evidence to date points to the potential for these tensions and disparities between food safety requirements and NOP standards in multiple farm management areas. And that includes the application of soil amendments, the reliance on costly chlorinated sanitizing agents for agricultural and wash water, the conservation of biodiversity in the farm environment, and also integrating livestock in all kinds of settings, including orchard settings. And unfortunately, while these tensions are common experiences among the organic community, there has been little information collected that details the top pressure points where research could best support organic growers. So our needs assessment project is currently collecting information from organic farmers to try to better understand the impacts that these tensions or incongruities between organic certification and food safety requirements might be having on organic farmers. And we have a long-term goal of creating research programs that can help reduce the burden of compliance with multiple regulations. And also, we're hoping that this future research could help inform petitions for policy changes where identified as needed. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask you all to share some of your thoughts and experiences. We can't do it on video by voice, but we do have some poll questions that I think, Brooke, you're going to launch for me. And you can also add some information, additional information in the chat. Okay, so I have 3 poll questions. And for the first 2, I'd just like to please ask that you only answer if you grow certified organic crops for human consumption and also have had to obtain food safety certification or audit. And then the last question can be answered by everyone. So I'll just read the question, I guess, as you all are filling it out. So please rate the level of tension that your farm has experienced between organic certification and third-party food safety certification for each of the following areas. And I guess we have 3 levels now: no tension, moderate tension, and major tension. Oh, there we go. I couldn't see the whole question on my little poll that popped up, but when I expand out the box, then you can see all the words, in case anybody else is having similar issues. I don't see any more people coming in here. So Brooke, do we end the poll after each question, or?
This is Jenny. Sorry, I'll just jump in because I created the poll, so I know they're all there together. So if you scroll down in the box, you should see the second question.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Okay. So then the second question, I guess we can just move on. To what extent do these barriers limit your farm's ability to resolve tension and complying with both of the organic certification and third-party food safety certification requirements? So the first one is just asking, what level of tension you have. The second one is asking specifically what the barriers might be. Lack of money, lack of time, lack of tools. And then the third question, anybody, I guess, can answer if you all can scroll down on that box. And it's a short answer, so you could just fill it in. If you run out of space, then please go ahead and add it in the chat box. We'd love to hear your stories. But we'd like to know what kinds of tools or technologies or information could, I guess I'm going to keep listing this, scientific evidence or technical support would help you to better manage farm operations for both food safety and organic certification. So this one can be from anyone, because you might not have had experience with tensions, or you might just be like a fear of attention, something that you think would be a problem for you if you were trying to get food safety certification or organic certification. So you could even not be an organic certified farmer and answer this. And I don't know how much time you want to offer for this, Brooke, before we move on.
I can go ahead and stop sharing and then we can, did everyone see the results? There. And then everyone can just close it out on their own screen.
Do I have to? Oh, I see an opportunity for me to share results too. Should I just close this box?
Yeah, just close it. I think
Okay,
everyone's
thanks.
seen the responses. I can't take it away from everyone. Everyone has to do that on their
Okay,
own.
great. Okay, great. So yeah, thank you for taking the time to answer. And like I said, if you have more questions or stories or anything, you know, add them to the chat. Maybe we can discuss them. But I appreciate you taking that time, and that's all I have today. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, thank you so much. We're gonna let our panelists have a little breather while we collect the questions, and we do have a couple minutes with them for a Q&A. So go ahead, and if you have any questions, FSMA to GAP to organic compliance within all of the food safety procedures, go ahead and drop them in the chat there. I'm gonna do a quick screen share for just some wrap up, and want to thank you all for being here with us today. Do all the 50 clicks to get the screen share going there again. Okay. So just a really big thank you to everyone who joined us today on the call and previous sessions. Be sure to fill out that survey that pops up when you click out of here and keep the conversations going. A lot of gratitude for all of our speakers today. If you missed them, you can catch those recordings next week. And you know that there are incredible resources waiting for you in the virtual trade show. And just a quick plug for tomorrow. We have an incredible line of speakers coming for you. We're starting off the morning with Farmer Hacks again at 10:45. And our keynote tomorrow is Dr. David Johnson. You do not want to miss his talk starting at noon. And then we have a talk with Steve Dipper, and then a following conversation with Scott Gowers, Kentucky farmer, and then our big closing session all together, the whole Oak community. So great things on the agenda for tomorrow. Don't miss them. Okay, let's bring everyone back into this final session for this conversation, and let me get over here to some questions. Okay, let's see. Here's a question for Bryan. Can you share an example or two of the packaging solutions you found to help farmers extend their shelf life or product quality, produce quality? I don't know, what are some like go-to improvements that you're seeing or recommendations for produce farmers?
I would say the number one thing that we've seen improve shelf life is maintaining, particularly in the height of the growing season, maintaining two different temperatures. Which, you know, can come with some costs associated with it, but it's generally done by two different CoolBot systems. One that you're going to store your potentially cold, you know, crops that can be damaged by cold if they're stored too cold. Things like, you know, obviously eggplant, squash, basil. Things like that are grown in the height of the summer, maintaining a temperature around 45-50 degrees for those. And then cold crop, you know, when you kind of have that overlapping kind of cold crops and broccoli and stuff like that, keeping those in between 32 and 36 degrees can really extend the shelf life of both of those. And then the other thing it's a big deal is humidity control. So keeping things covered, particularly things with high surface area, things like that. So.
Great, thanks for that. And just to clarify, you did mention the GAP audit. third-party gap audit costs money, and share the great resource for the Kentucky Hort Council. I dropped that link into the chat for folks. But your working with you is free for farmers. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, I am free.
Okay. Okay. And everyone's going to have your contact information through HOOVA. So if they wanted to follow up with you about that option, they know where to find you. Okay, let's see. Mark, let's see, what could you share some farmer anecdotes? What are you seeing on the farms that you're working with that are the most common challenges?
Hey, good question. As our inspectors are getting out more on farms, one of the things that we're seeing is probably lack of hand wash stations, maybe where they should be. And we actually are working, I think right now, with University of Kentucky to build a model portable hand wash station that can kind of clamp on the back of a wagon or maybe one of the ATVs that some farms may use that can actually follow the workers around. That's one. And then the other big one is sanitizing agents. I think Amber may have touched on that a little bit in her presentation, at least with chlorine. That's one possible sanitizer that is approved, except for you have to make sure that you're using any sanitizer, including chlorine, that it's actually labeled for its intended use. Is it allowed to touch food? Is it allowed for food contact surfaces? And if there are some subtle differences in those labels. So that's a big one. And then we're also seeing maybe some of the growers not actually having access to, or maybe not knowing entirely how to utilize the test strips that are used to measure the concentration of the sanitizers. So we hope to work on that more this year as well. And Brooke, I just saw there's one of the questions in my chat box. Somebody's asking, and I think we had this question during one of the PSA grower trainings, are worm castings considered under the animal waste rule or exempt? So we actually had this question a few trainings ago, and it's my understanding that these are biological soil amendments of animal origin. And I've got two scientists on the call. If you have any additional information you'd like to share, Amber or Bryan, feel free to do that. But that's actually a really good question, and one that we've gotten before.
I don't have anything to add to that. I actually was thinking that is a really great question, and I am not familiar enough with all of the fine print to know how that's categorized. So I will default to you, Mark.
Yeah, same here. I don't know the details on worm castings, but I do remember that question being asked in one of the PSA trainings.
And Jenny just dropped a link in the chat there from the National Young Farmers group, the Practical Guide to Food Safety from 2019, saying the FDA considers worms to be animals and worm castings to be of animal origin. So there it is. Great question. Yeah.
Brooke, I have a question for Mark if you
go for it.
That. So I was hoping, I know, Mark, that you may reference to me in hopes that maybe I might illuminate some of the changes in the water regulations, but I don't know exactly what's coming up with those changes for the water. But I do know that like the Organic Trade Association submitted some major public comments on behalf of the organic sector. And last I heard, it sounded like some of those comments have been considered. So some of the challenges that organic farmers were facing have been considered. And I haven't gotten an update. So I was wondering if you had anything you could illuminate about that.
Yeah, so mine is just going to be from a high level perspective. So I know that under the I guess current produce safety rule, when we talk about production water, and water is, as you know, a major source of contamination, or could be, right? Particularly if you're irrigating, touching the edible portion of the produce very close to harvest. So we know water could be a risk. But under the original rule, there were, some folks might have called it onerous, some pretty onerous water testing requirements about setting baselines and retesting every year. And then you keep a rolling average and you drop last year's results. So a lot of more water testing guidance in the current produce safety rule. And it's my understanding we actually have some FDA webinars and conferences that are coming up, and where we're going to learn a little bit more about that as well. But I think that they're going to drop most of those pre-harvest or production water testing requirements, and then put the onus on the grower to do an assessment of their water source, kind of like a risk assessment. And that might still require the need for some testing, but doing more of a kind of a risk-based assessment on the water source. Bryan, you look like you might want to add something to that. But one other thing, though, before I toss it back, you made a good point, Amber. So right now, those proposed rules by FDA amending the production water requirements are out. They're not set in stone yet. And we are actually going through a comment period right now. I think the comment period is open till April. KDA did send a press release out. I don't know if anybody actually saw that mentioning the comment period. I don't have that information in front of me, but you could, I'm sure, a simple web search, type in FDA proposed water rule, and you can get information on where you can actually read those, that proposed rule, some of the reasoning behind it. And certainly if you want to submit comments, FDA is soliciting comments right now. So thanks for reminding me about the comments there, Amber.
So thank you all participants for your questions, for our speakers. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom and your expertise out there with farmers and through your research. So we really appreciate it, and all the resources that you're sharing here, but beyond here, actually. We know that you're out there doing all the good work every day. So thank you. If anyone on the call wants to follow up with our speakers, you can contact them through FUBA,